Whether you're playing in the sun-soaked heartland of the Roman Empire in Latium, or the literally soaked, boggy Celtic distant shores of Albion, or both, this Anno 117 Pax Romana is, on balance, a great city builder RTS game. Anno 117's core gameplay centers around a few returning and greatly enhanced mechanics. Both of its two regions can be your starting location. They can trade with one another using the rather excellent automatable trade system, and you can settle islands to build as many or few settlements as you'd like. The natural landscapes and resources of this world are what you'll exploit. They're deeply varied, and some of them are region-specific, most obviously when you take a look at the usefully muddy bogscapes of Albion, though island scarcity matters a lot here too. Each island has its own fertility settings, so each one will offer a slightly different set of land, river, mountain, and sea resources. The core Anno concepts of resource harvesting and production chains remain here in Anno 117. The different types and tiers of population that are on offer, however, vary depending on whether you're playing in Latium, where 4 glorious tiers of Roman populations can reside, or Albion, where traditional Celtic pops and/or blended Romano-Celtic populations can be housed across 5 total tiers, 2 branching paths. The differences between the tiers of people go beyond their aesthetics, primarily thanks to their growing and varied lists of possible needs, another core mechanic here that they will demand. Upgrading populations requires that some, though not technically all of their needs, should be met. So that means food, city services, and goods for the most part. To begin with, these are very straightforward, with simple 2-step production chains like chopping down some trees for wood, storing that in a warehouse, or sending it straight to the sawmill to turn it into timber for your buildings. Likewise, the other sort of early production chains like farming, where you'll farm hemp and then spin that into tunics. More advanced upgrades require you to expand and/or trade your way into more goods, as the needs of your population grow with every upgrade and more advanced supply chains are required. No single island can supply all of the resources you'll need alone due to the varying island fertility. Islands either have a resource or they don't. It's either on or off, hence why trade or expansion is necessary to reach the mid and later game. Thankfully, trade works very well. You can do it manually, you can send ships and manually load or unload, or you can set basically just buy and sell orders at your trade depot and have your trading partners do the rest. Should you choose to expand, which you absolutely should choose to do, peaceful expansion to new islands across both regions within one game is entirely possible because you can and do play with both living provinces in a single sandbox experience. Likewise with the campaign. Both are alive and accessible for peaceful expansion. Just build or buy a ship, send it to a new island, pay the price, and manage the expectation of your rivals in the Emperor. More on that a little later. Aggressive expansion with Anno 117's optional combat is a great option should you choose to use it. Armies are supplied using their unlockable buildings and supply chains. Like anything that you don't start with, they're initially hidden behind requirements to either unlock the next tier of population or a new research discovery is required, using the knowledge system we'll talk about in a moment. The RTS combat here in Anno 117 feels very familiar to me. If you've played almost any RTS game like this, it'll feel pretty familiar to you as well. It's a good system, where you train land-based armies at buildings like barracks, and construct warships at your shipyard. Both categories can be expanded and upgraded using research, and my personal favourite tends to be the naval gameplay here, where ships can be somewhat customised, most usefully in my opinion, to retrofit civilian ships with extra upgrades, maybe some weaponry. To capture an island, you'll need to fight your way through any enemy troops, reducing their morale, health, whatever you want to call it, and their defenses if they have any, like walls, guard towers, etc. The ultimate goal is to get to the governor's villa. This specialist housing prestigious residence is home to the governor of any island, includes yours by the way. Destroying it and capturing the site gives a really nice array of options for what you might like to do next. You can take over manual control of the island, with or without the pre-existing infrastructure that the AI has haphazardly placed. The AI, speaking of, can make some weird decisions, and not throw stones in glass houses here, but the AI also makes some questionable road or building placement design decisions at times too. If you don't want to manually control the island, in the same way, well, similar way, that you can automate combat, literally just hit the button and let your troops do the fight for you, you can also, in a sense, automate the management of the island by vassalizing it. Or finally, if destruction is your only option, you could just raze the island, returning it to an open, natural state for anybody to come along and settle. Whether you're using Anno 117's automatable trade system or building your own internal trade network to supply each island with the goods and resources it might need, you absolutely must experience every tier of population. Anno 117 really lives up to its beautiful looking settings in my view when you upgrade your pops to those greatest tiers, and through the knowledge system I touched on earlier. This knowledge tree, or web, I'm not quite sure what to call it, is massive in size and in importance to the game. Broken into 3 separate parts, economic, civic, military upgrades, there are also gameplay requirements called inspirations here. These can sometimes be avoided by working sort of down and around a different path, but you'll still need to meet the fairly straightforward requirements that will often push you to different territories, different islands, landscapes, farming or harvesting different resources. You get the idea. The scale of the research options and the inspirations make for a system that feels very slow early on, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, as the overall progression in the game actually feels very satisfying, even 20-ish hours into a single sandbox playthrough. Knowledge, like the similar religious system, which I should briefly mention, while it operates in a similar way in terms of how you generate faith, the religious system is actually quite different. Here you select a deity for a local island and you'll receive generally resource buffs, production buffs to their specific category. So you can cater an island's production, whether it be military production or seaside resources, around its deity. You'll also have global effects, so all of your faith followers will contribute towards other unlocks like statues or further benefits. It's a really neat system. Back to knowledge though, its generation generally uses buildings that supply people within an operating area. You can think about this a little bit like an area of effect, right? Many buildings use road distance, and road connections are vital to storage and the trading post, of course. This is often, though, in the case of city service buildings for knowledge, visually demonstrated in a very intuitive way, actually, just like many others, using red or green arrows to show which buildings will be positively, or negatively if there's a negative impact, affected by the building. Everything from fire safety to happiness can be impacted, and crucially, things like knowledge and income are applied to nearby residents' dwellers, so placement matters here massively. I really enjoy building the advanced Roman islands, using the glorious-looking functional unlocks too, like aqueducts and the mighty amphitheatre. Combine that with better materials for building roads as you upgrade your way through, and a wide variety of city service, production and residential buildings on offer, and I think that city building in this game works very well. And in my view, subjectively of course, it looks fantastic. It's very satisfying, especially, and I want to emphasize this, at the greater extent, at the later game. That being said, urban design can actually start quite early. And if you're anything like me, particularly when you're city building, it's an optionally used, optional extra, very optionally used. Here you can change the texture of open terrain, or place props like trees, hedges, decorative walls, fires, and statues. I'd love to see them add more here, by the way, but what we've got so far, I will admit, I really like to use it. I like to try and utilize them in particular to fill in those sort of unwanted or unintentional extra spaces, corners, gaps, or along the sides of roads. Trees are fantastic for adding life and texture to settlements, and the terrain textures are great because the citizenry will actually genuinely use them. They'll utilize them as walking paths or plazas, public spaces, perfect for courtyards or little shortcuts. And then of course there's the obvious, yet so far unspoken fact that these settlements will utilise diagonal roads, adding twists and turns, and a much appreciated tool for city building in Anno. Those diagonals work well most of the time. Roads are fairly easy to place, and buildings attach mostly in a very logical fashion. Decorating with diagonals feels slightly less reliable, and the game can struggle to fill diagonal spaces properly for me from time to time, especially with farm or crop placement and those surface textures. I think there's some bug fixing needed here, not a massive amount, but there is definitely some to smooth out the user experience. Speaking of U's like the user experience, the UI, that user interface, is also generally workable and functional. Some elements have some really nice design work too, again those later things like the amphitheatre, while others are generally described as pretty plain. I find somehow that I still struggle to find things from time to time, clicking on the wrong tab the first try. The keyboard shortcut tabs and the tools like upgrade are helpful here for sure, but ultimately I still find the tabs and layers to be a little bit cumbersome at times, and frustrating during those occasions where I'm maybe managing multiple urgent priorities. A little more information on supply and demand with supply chains in and around here could also be a helpful addition to the PC UI, though supply and demand information behind your governor portrait at the top center of the screen does present this information with a lengthy scrolling study. Casting my mind back to the start of a sandbox game, the game setup options are great, actually. Genuinely. Plenty of options to fine-tune the game settings. The overall difficulty can be scaled up or down nicely, very nicely, by using the default options, or by further changing your rivals, your governors, or the emperor, where multiple options are available. These easy settings, combined with an optional structured campaign mode, which in my view acts like an extended tutorial, but if it's your thing, by all means go out there and do it, and the relatively small amount of starting resources that you'll have to manage. When you combine all of that, relative ease, I feel like Anno 1.17 is probably the most accessible Anno game for new players to date. It's still Anno, don't get me wrong, I just think the barrier to entry feels lower here than it has for the previous titles, depending of course on how you set it up. That'll have a very large impact, in fact, on the challenges you'll face and make for a certainly more difficult experience. The AI is a difficult thing for me to judge, honestly. The rival behavior varies a lot, individually, depending on which person you're facing, which is nice. And the settings obviously have a massive impact here too. The AI certainly builds things that I look at sometimes and think, those layouts are neither functional nor aesthetic, or that defensive wall or tower placement makes literally no sense. On the other hand, at this stage, I think it's better than its predecessors, and it's definitely provided rivals that I've been pretty happy with. On the topic of those rivals, or allies, if you're that way inclined, you're probably not alone in that big old world. Early gifts from these people are a great money blessing, and trade agreements with other governors are brilliant tools for growth too. Beyond that, defensive pacts and alliances can help, but ultimately the number of diplomatic options are fairly straightforward and fairly limited. Your actions matter here too though. From reckless wars, breaking treaties, or settling a little bit too close for comfort, these shape your reputation in the eyes of fellow governors and that emperor, your ultimate rival or greatest ally and boss, depending on your reputation with him. This can be influenced by successfully completing tasks, quests, challenges for the Emperor that appear like in-game events, though other event-based decisions and outcomes matter too. You'll also interact with other governors, your residents, the Emperor's representatives, or pirate-raiding factions in a similar way, with events and quests that appear from time to time, usually as optional extras. Before I move to my sort of wrap-up final thoughts, a quick note on platforms and performance. I've played exclusively and recorded on PC. I cannot speak to the console versions, though I note that they have their own UI, tools to try and make things a little bit easier over there. Performance on my PC, content creator, 64 gigs of RAM, a 12900K processor, and a 4090 graphics card for context, was generally very good. The game is stable. I haven't personally experienced any issues with crashing with the early access press preview version I've been using. Of note, by the way, I received this quite a few weeks ago, so I've built up about maybe 40 or 50 hours of playtime now overall in this build that was provided to me by Ubisoft. The only time I experience consistently low or noticeably low frames is when it drops to maybe about 15 FPS when I'm panning across my large island when it's running at 2 or 3 speed. That is the exception to the rule, but you should be aware of that. The good news is it's not a huge issue, of course, given the nature of the game and the fact that it doesn't play out most of the time. It does not seem to reduce the overall game performance. That is to say, one massively populated megalopolis doesn't really seem to matter when you're off building on one of your other islands, thanks to the distance in between each one. This is my, so far, only concern with performance. My concern with this video is that I haven't met my goal of being both informative yet brief. So, it's time for my condensed thoughts, my final thoughts on Anno 117 Pax Romana, name just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it, for this review. I think it's a great Anno game. It's a great city builder and RTS game. From decorating the bustling little streets of an urban centre to planning farmyard production chains or building mightily useful Roman aqueducts, Anno 117 delivers a very satisfying experience. Its trade system is great, its setting is gorgeous, and while its land-based combat is fairly vanilla, I really like the naval gameplay for its RTS combat and all that it can do. While the game definitely has patch updates in its future, this will surprise probably none of you if you've followed a strategy game release before, for things like balance, minor bug fixes, and improvements. That kind of thing happens literally every time. I found that the overall polish here is great. I should note, too, I'd fall off my chair backwards if the game wasn't drenched in DLC in a few years' time. My criticisms are minor in comparison to the brilliant things that this game already does. But the Ubisoft Connect requirements again feel like an unnecessary and, frankly, invasive administrative burden and will likely prove to be a stain on the game's reputation. And I'm really hesitant to put any kind of sort of number or review score to it. I don't like to give review scores, and I certainly don't want to call it too early. But I've been having a lot of fun with Anno, and I think that this game easily makes it into my top 3 strategy games of the year for 2025. In fact, it's probably right up there by the top. Thank you very much for being here today and watching my Anno 117 Pax Romana review. I'm sure you'll have plenty of thoughts to share down below. Please do, chuck them in the comments. I'll be floating around down there. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.